Hello, we're going to be starting in about 10 minutes or less. So if folks can sit down, start grabbing your chairs, that'd be very helpful. There's a lot of people outside waiting. So we're going to work on getting a head count, see how many more people we can let in.
We're going to go on until about 8:30, after which we'll have time to all connect with each other further. And then on Saturday, July the 15th, we'll be hosting a hackathon for blockchain tokens, ICOs, and legal frameworks. If you have a project you would like to propose for others, devs, lawyers, designers, to hack on together, please come talk to Noah and myself after the panel. And before I hand things over to Noah, might I just say a quick thank you to our volunteers and our sponsors for this evening's event. Coinbase is the world's most popular way to buy and sell Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. I use Coinbase. It's easy. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up an account and buy your first Ether if you haven't already. Co-Makery is Noah's company. Co-Makery helps networks of collaborators build products together and awards tokens for co-design and other contributions. Legal.io, the company I work for, we build scalable legal service delivery platforms for any organization seeking to serve their community with faster referrals to trusted networks of vetted experts. We currently support platforms for immigration, creative artists, family law, international trade, and more. And if any of you are seeking legal expertise to help with the token launch, we're working with partners to set up a network for just this purpose. So please come talk to me afterwards as well. Digital Garage is this beautiful space all around us. Thank you so much to Digital Garage. It's a beautiful co-working space. Talk to Ron here if you're interested in checking out the space for other uses. I'd also like to thank Grant and the Ethereum Developers Meetup for helping spread the word about this. And I'm going to hand it over right now to Ron, who's going to say a few things about Consensus, the company he works with.
What's up, blockchain and legal people? Yeah. So I just moved back to the Bay Area a couple weeks ago after a good 9 months in New York working with Consensus. Consensus is a venture production studio, and we also do enterprise proof of concept consulting. We are rapidly expanding. We hired more people this week than I have fingers. So we're really looking to hire. If you are interested in joining this movement, look for me. I'm pretty easy to spot. Let's chat. If by any chance you miss me, I left some business cards on the podium over there. So we're setting up shop out here in the Bay Area. Please join us. We have jobs here. We have jobs remote. We have technical jobs. We have non-technical jobs. Come on, it's been a fun ride. And another onboarding route we have is academy.consensus.net. So this is a way if you want to bone up on your blockchain skills, we have a free 9-week class that'll give you the things that you need to learn. And then if you pass, we'll send you in a real life situation where you can help build government solutions and enterprise solutions and learn the real world. So speaking of the real world, we have some awesome people here from space. Just thank you all very much for coming. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for people who waited outside so patiently on the wait list. Next time we got to tokenize this event. All right, thank you all very much.
So my last thing to mention is that the hashtag for this event is #LegalHack. You can do that Legal Hackers and @SF Legal Hackers. So the topic at hand. In 2017, numerous projects have raised 10 million plus in minutes using an initial coin offering and token sale, or a token sale. And recent successful raises have included Bancor, Lunyr, Basic Potential Token, Gnosis Prediction Market, Storj, Brave Browser, and many more. Meanwhile, which is why we're here, controversy rages around the distinction between blockchain securities and work tokens, what legal jurisdictions apply, and the investor diligence and disclosures that should be required. We're happy to have a really knowledgeable panel here this evening to help us make sense of the current landscape. But before we get started with the panel, I want to ask you guys a couple of questions. So who here has owned a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, or Litecoin? Awesome. And who here has owned a crowd token sale token like BAT, Gnosis, Bancor, or Storj? I'm not going to ask you which one in particular. Okay, great. And who has a project that you might want to fund with a token sale or initial offering? Interesting. And last question, who is worried that we are in a cryptocurrency market bubble? Some probably some more of that. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we're going to dive right into some key questions. Arnold. Pham is the co-founder and CEO of Lunyr, a decentralized knowledge base built on Ethereum. Lunyr launched a crowd sale in March and successfully obtained 3.2 million in. Besides working on Lunyr, Arnold also teaches decentralized application development at the Ethereum Developers Community in Silicon Valley. Ruben Ramanathan is product counsel at Coinbase. And Ruben wrote and lectured the world's first postgraduate course on the regulation of digital currency and co-authored the very useful blockchain token securities law framework. He's been advising clients in the blockchain space since 2014 and regularly delivers presentations on regulatory and policy challenges in blockchain technology. Tony Lane is an entrepreneur in the digital currency and blockchain industry. He co-founded Cointelegraph and the virtual blockchain nation BitNation. She's been affectionately entitled the Joan of Arc of Blockchain and Young Star of Bitcoin by her peers in various publications. And Ms. Lane serves as an advisor to several notable companies, runs family offices, including, not limited to, Singularity University, Factum, United Nations, Likey, HSBC, Bosch, Cisco, P&G, The Future, and St. Gallen Symposium. Matt Corva runs Legal at Consensus, a growing venture production studio with over 200 employees globally. Consensus works directly with corporations and nation states to deliver blockchain solutions based on both public and private Ethereum implementations. In addition, Consensus incubates many spoke projects that are focused on building the emerging decentralized world, including MetaMask, Truffle, Infura, Gnosis, Uport, and Ujo Music. Consensus is also a founding member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. Let's see, Eric Sivertson is general counsel at AngelList, where he works on fundraising products, including the launch of Panelists. Eric is particularly focused on securities law and regulatory aspects of token launches. And before joining AngelList, Eric was a partner at Ocean NYC, where he led venture capital practice. Led the venture capital practice. Arthur Bregman is the CTO of Tezos, a new decentralized blockchain establishing a true digital commonwealth. And it turns out they're holding a fundraiser for Swift. No. Okay. We'll get into that in 2 minutes, but there is the Tezos Foundation. You've heard about me before. I'm the co-organizer of SF Legal Hackers, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Cofounder. So we just had our audience poll, and now let's start by concretely describing what an initial coin offering is and what a token sale is, and also get into some of the distinctions that are out there between different legal entity types. So Arnold, let's start with you. So what is Lunyr?
So Lunyr is a decentralized world knowledge base where people get rewarded with tokens for contributing and peer reviewing information. That's the simplest description.
And can you describe what Lunyr tokens are and why they're valuable?
So Lunyr tokens are part of an incentivized contribution and peer review system that we're using Ethereum to make live. And the tokens themselves are used for bidding on advertising on the platform.
And could you walk us sort of step by step through the process that people use for participating in the token sale?
So how the token sale ran is we had a fixed number of weeks. So the token sale ran for a period of 4 weeks, and we set everything at a fixed price, specifically to make it look more like a commodity, unlike a lot of the other crowd sales that you see. More on that later. They're able to do that because a lot of the companies are incorporated outside of the US. So you see a lot of practices that normally would not be best over here. So on March, we opened the crowd sale, and it was done through an Ethereum smart contract, where people or users, token buyers, were able to purchase Lunyr tokens at a rate of 44 tokens per Ether. by sending or calling a method on the smart contract. This was done entirely through an Ethereum smart contract, which you can think of almost like a program where it holds tokens and it doesn't release those funds. Depending on the code, it holds those tokens, and only after the crowd sale hits a certain minimum ether threshold does the crowd sale considered successful. And after it hits a maximum cap, then the crowd sale ends, and then the funds are distributed to the rest of the team. And the tokens themselves, the ability to transfer tokens back and forth is unlocked for token buyers.
Great, and just to contrast that, Arthur, could you tell us a little bit about what Tezos is?
Yeah, so Tezos is a smart contract platform. Primarily, it's a new blockchain, and it's a base for infrastructure. It has most of the makings of all the blockchains that you kind of use, such as Bitcoin or Ethereum. I think the particularity of Tezos started out with a realization in 2014 that there's a perception that blockchains are these purely mathematical objects, and that they just obey a fixed set of rules, but actually they are political systems, whether we want it or not. And the idea was to try and analyze the politics inside blockchain. We do that by having a governance mechanism which allows decentralized decision making about how to blockchain should work.
And for Tezos, how do the tokens for Tezos, what is the value that you represent?
Well, you can do several things with Tezos token. One of the things you can do is use it for transaction fees, which are necessary for running smart contracts on the platform. But one of the roles of the Tezos token is actually taking part in this governance model. The more tokens you have, the more influence you have over the outcomes of governance mechanism.
And just to sort of talk a little bit about the Tezos Foundation, what's the legal entity for the Tezos Foundation, and are there major differences with the way that Tezos is proceeding versus the Lunyr token sale?
So unfortunately, don't know too much about the Lunyr token since I don't know if I can contrast. The difference we have, I think, with the practices. There's many projects now who have, a Stiftung backlog for all of these foundations. What we do want is, if we're building base infrastructure, it makes sense to have a nonprofit foundation behind it because it's a network that's open to everyone. It's not just for token holders. So we set up this entity, but contrary to most projects, we actually wanted to have a fully independent entity. So, no one who's been involved with dynamic ledger solutions, the private company who's been developing the ledger, is a director or has any role within the Swiss Foundation. We made it a completely separate entity with clear contracts. Whereas right now there seems to be a tendency of people using foundation sort of as corporations where they will give themselves jobs and give themselves salaries within those foundations. So we didn't want to have that.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. And I wanted to jump over to Matt and just, we're sort of still exploring the foundations here of the conversation. What projects is Consensus working on that are specifically related to token sales? This is
sure. So, can you hear me without this? No. Okay. Try and do this. Hopefully, not hear myself right behind my head. So Consensus, you may know some of our token sales that we've completed. Gnosis was probably our most prominent one. In addition, we've been the tech partner on a couple of sales. Singular DTV, which was one of the early Ethereum token sales. We did a lot of the technology work on that. I am proud to announce today we just completed a securities offering on Ethereum for a film finance solely on Ethereum called the Braid Movie Project, which closed 1.75 million in funding just as of this afternoon. So that will be a movie that is decentralized. We follow the securities laws in doing that offering. It's an example of a securities token versus a classic protocol token or utility token. In addition, we are launching AdChain with a partner called MetaX coming up this Monday. We're the technical partner on that. Have done a lot of the work on the smart contracts and advertising solutions in that system.
Great. And so, one of the ways that people are doing token sales is on Ethereum, mostly with ERC20 tokens, which is the name of the standard for a token contract. It just conforms to a certain programming interface, technically, but using. And I just wanted to ask people on the panel, one, do they think that ERC20's 20 tokens right now for people that are following this path are the best approach? And how about 6 months from now? And maybe you start with some.
Well, and by the way, just to reintroduce myself, I'm sure we'll get to that later, but my name is Tony Lane Casterly, TLC. I am co-founder of Cointelegraph, one of the largest media networks in the blockchain industry, and I am also the co-founder at BitNation. Is this on? No. Oh, maybe it's because I didn't turn the mic on. Is it on now? This one's on. Is this on? Too many mics. And BitNation is essentially the virtual blockchain nation. We replaced the Stiftung, or the reason for being of the nation state, which is fundamentally jurisdiction. So in terms of what tokens you should use for a launch, I think most people are aiming toward ERC20, and we've also had solutions built closed loop toward the ERC20 ecosystem like 0x, which is the decentralized exchange. However, the way we think about infrastructure at BitNation, the way I think about infrastructure as an individual, is completely holistic, because this entire industry is in its absolute infancy. And to sit here today and to tell you that I know empirically that this is going to be the winner, there's going to be no other tokens that exist, I think would not only be 150% false, because we can't predict the future and we don't know what's going to happen, but simultaneously, I think that'd be extremely short-sighted, and I think that that would lend toward the homogenization of thought that would monopolize our ecosystem to the extent that the core founding purpose of our industry would be defeated. And in that instance, that is not a kind of environment that I would like to participate in. So I think in terms of decentralization, we also need to think about decentralization in terms of the way we are building credible pieces of infrastructure for our ecosystem. If there is only one answer, then we have already lost.
Thank you. Let's see. Arnold, do you want to also take a stab at that? About ERC20 tokens?
Yeah, sure. So I think overall the ERC20 tokens, they're healthy for the system, because overall what we're beginning to see are a lot of people coming into the ecosystem, a huge influx, just from hearing about crowd sales, about Ethereum getting big. And it's good overall to have best practices and standards. We're going to start seeing these tokens integrate into systems together, and having structurally common, something that's structurally common is going to be important for future-proofing the tokens, the way we use them, and the way that they're transferred later on.
Yeah, Arthur, as someone who's building a new blockchain, how do you look at the ERC20 token standard and sort of future in that space?
So, yeah, the ERC20 system itself is just an API, nothing specifically wrong about ERC20. So I guess the question is more about the ecosystem of current ERC20 tokens. There's a lot of tokens in ERC20 which I think have a reason to exist. I'm personally a bit of a farmer student here. I think that there's a realization that hasn't happened yet, which is that just because you're building a useful dApp, you can build the best dApp in the world. It's going to be beautiful, have nice GUIs and work flawlessly. Maybe there's even a bug. That doesn't mean that the app GUI is going to be worth anything. And people are jumping from one thing like, oh, it's a useful app. the app coin is going to have any value, and I think that's not true. And so it worries me a bit because I think that it's, tokenization is useful, can be useful as a fundraising mechanism, but I don't think that it can turn a business model that didn't work before, which is sort of a fully open source company, into all of a sudden, hey, now this works. I think people are overgeneralizing from what happens with Bitcoins, which is, or even Ethereum, which are cryptocurrencies. And with cryptocurrency, you have a massive network effect, which means that you can withstand having fully open source code because you have such a huge community behind it. And people turn that on its head and they're like, oh, if we create a token, then all of a sudden we have a network effect with our application. And that's completely backward. If you're building an app coin and there's tremendous network effect behind your app coin, then you can't survive being open source, right? So like a company like Craigslist, for example, can be open source tomorrow, it doesn't change anything, there's nothing to the code of Craigslist that will survive it. But people are inverting it. They're saying like, oh, I'll have a token, therefore I'll have the opposite. And they think most of the applications that are currently being built do not have a network. So that doesn't apply to, for example, issuing securities and using it, for creating a movie, for example, with the RC20. I think that's a great idea that we're supposed to define. But as a funding mechanism for open source application, I don't think it's going to last.
Great, thanks. So we're going to move on to some diligence questions, which is another hot topic. And maybe we can start with Ruben here about what do people need to watch out for when launching an initial coin offering or crowdsourcing? I have an easy one to start off. Hey everyone, I'm Ruben. So from a developer's perspective, there's a lot of risk involved. And, we've done some work in the space related to the securities law risk, and that is that you might be issuing a token that's a security here in the US or similarly regulated in another country. There's also potential implications around the money transmission and money services business law. Suffice it to say that all of these things need careful thought. The framework we put out last year is attempting to draw a line between tokens that are securities and tokens that are not, but that question still hasn't been answered. So I guess in the space for developers, there's those risks, and then there's a whole other set of risks for the buyers of tokens. And it comes back to questions like, is this token going to be valuable? Is the network going to be useful? Is the development team going to build what they promise to build? So there's a bunch of questions there.
Right, absolutely. Maybe Eric, can you answer that question as well?
Sure. So first, I'll just introduce what we're doing at AngelList that touches on this. So I'm working on the CoinList project. We're partnering with Protocol Labs to build off of our experience at AngelList and bringing fundraising through the token launch model into a transparent and compliant framework that will solve a lot of the problems that Pham touches on. From a diligence perspective, there's the two sides. There's diligence for the team that's putting together the new protocol and wants to launch the network and understanding what are you getting yourself into in terms of the inherent regulatory risk that's going to be there. What kind of auction mechanics are you going to use? What are the tax implications, which is an issue that we spend a lot of time thinking of. I think it's glossed over a little bit if you're going to stay in the US. And then is there, to the point that was raised, is there really a reason for you to be launching a new token? Is there really a factor solving? From the investor perspective, I think it's going to be largely the same issue. It's very similar to angel investing, even in our heart, that there's not going to be a lot to diligence as an investor in this space. You're going to have a team, you're going to look at their track record, you're going to look at what kind of social proof they have, who's behind them, who's in their team, how they raised venture rounds, which is a kind of a hybrid model that you see if folks would raise some equity capital and then go on to launch a token. And then I think said well, the issue we think about most is really, is this an appropriate solution for distributed ledger technology and native token? Are you taking a token and using it to help a distributed network allocate and manage scarce resources? And if so, that's kind of the gating question that we're thinking about it from. And if not, it's probably just a bolt-on security capital raising technique and gimmick, use your word.
Right. So there's some questions about how to determine if a project is actually worth investing in. and how to screen for which projects will be of value. Maybe we can just go down the line, just kind of quickly and mention a couple things, each person just sort of thinking about what constitutes something that might be investable. This is not investment advice, this is just sort of personal reflections to be put.
Sure, so I'm going to get my exercise running away from the speaker. So just to pick up on something that Eric said about there not being a lot to diligence, we have an engineer in the Bay Area, Joseph Chow. He's one of the leading security experts in smart contracts in the world. And if he was here and he heard that, he'd say, oh my God, no, right? Like there is a lot to diligence. So one of the things that for consensus we look at in projects is we look at the code, right? A lot of these people have open GitHub repositories of their code. Well, does it follow coding best practices? Does it follow Ethereum best practices? And what ERC20 is, it's the standard, right? If we follow this standard, we know how it will behave. Smart contracts are both powerful and dangerous. If you create new ways of doing things, you unlock potentially new great possibilities, but also pitfalls. So if you buy into a project that the code isn't great, that's really a great indication that you're chasing the wrong thing. The team is another thing, right? So we went from a period in time. Who remembers the Ethereum white paper? Who's read the Ethereum white paper? Yes, excellent, right? Have you read a white paper today? A white paper today is 7 pages long. 6 of the pages are the bio of the team and advisors that you haven't verified are they with the company or not. And the other is marketing what they're going to do with all the money you're going to give them, right? So that's a problem, right? So at Consensus, we've created a subsidiary of Consensus called Consensus Diligence. And this is what we do. We think the stakes are too high now to just take your word for it in your white paper. We look at decentralized applications for investors and token purchasers. We look at decentralized applications for the teams that are launching them themselves. They come to us and say, hey, are we following smart contract best practices, security best practices? And then as a sort of part of this conversation that we're not having on the technical side is all this is happening, we're talking about public Ethereum, but simultaneously enterprises are deploying smart contract systems in production now. And they're facing the same security questions, right? Like we've coded these things, we want to put customers on these things. Will they work? Will they break our system? And we're doing reviews for companies like that as well, because it's no longer, you can take our word for it, the stakes are too high. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head and don't have a whole lot to add to that, but I think kind of the idea being, yeah, is there, if there's a GitHub repository or a move seat, there's some ICOs where, like, to your point, you're raising tens of millions on a white paper and not a whole lot more. So there are the red flags for sure. And then, the diligence really is, I think, similar to, in this, again, my opinion, not a company line investment advice. But are they solving a problem? Does the protocol solve a problem that's uniquely solved by a distributed ledger technology? I think that becomes, in my view, a key question if I'm looking at these through an investor lens. My ability then to pick, is it going to be a solution that's lasting? Is it going to reach those network effects that it's intended to achieve? I think that becomes a little harder in diligence space. You don't have traction, you don't have objective metrics. It's really, you look at the code, if the code's available, does it follow the practices? And something that we're hoping to work on through CoinList is have these third-party opinions be able to be in diligence reports and experts who can kind of poke holes in proposed protocols and approaches.
Do you, just before we move on, I'm excited to move on, but also I'm just curious if you yet have a way of describing what the listing criteria for CoinList might be, or is it still too early?
Yeah, I don't want to dive into that.
That's okay. It's completely fair.
So I don't code. And I do think there's something beautiful about blockchain giving a person who would never otherwise have access to resources with the ability to raise capital. I've been homeless before, and I know I don't look like the archetype of someone who would be homeless ever in their life, but I think when you take away the ability for people who have had nothing, and granted, my situation wasn't as bad as anyone on the street, and I wouldn't say that as a defining characteristic of my life. But I would say that when you take the opportunity away from someone who's a refugee, and you say, oh, well, you know what, you can't raise money because you're not from this place of, you're not sitting in a seat of privilege in Silicon Valley where you're capable of doing that. I think that's a fault. And I think there are a lot of people who don't code, who are extremely capable, who are extremely driven, passionate, and intelligent, who have all of the capability in the world to build something that is absolutely meaningful. So I wouldn't take that away from people, especially people who are underprivileged, like in our round. I'm even giving some of my personal tokens away to people who are from underprivileged families, to women who have been victims of domestic violence, which is the majority of the homeless population is actually women and children. And people don't realize these things. So I think when we talk about capital from this framework where we're saying we need to integrate this idea of a system that you're raising capital into another system that understands the way capital is supposed to function, do you realize how nowhere in that sentence I said the word like people and or human and or individual? There's no humanity if we think about this from a completely systemic level. And I think that's an issue. I think we need to take more into account. In terms of investing, I mean, blockchain technology is effectively quantified information. To loop this into a bigger conversation, Mark Zuckerberg recently gave a speech at Harvard where he said, you know, how is it possible that I have $30 billion? And there are people who don't even know where like, their next meal is gonna come from. And you know what, you're right, that is a problem. Do you know why that's a problem? Because Facebook owns all the data. What is blockchain really but the Occam's razor of an elegant simplicity to take users of a platform that, while it's a step in the right direction, a public good, creating, you know, like a Facebook and or Google where you have access to a service for free, you're still fundamentally making your money and organizing your business model around the consolidated ownership of data. And blockchain fundamentally takes those ownership models and makes users into shareholders. And by redistributing that capital opportunity, creating a public database where identities are fundamentally pseudo-anonymous, we have the ability to transform the way we think about our economic life. So when I'm looking at business models, I'm fundamentally looking at, if you're launching a public token, what is the value of your public data set? Because that's a huge inversion that is happening in our industry. How do you make the users of some other platform into shareholders on the thing that you are creating? And I think there is a lot of potential. I just feel like you want to say something, so go ahead. You've lifted your mic like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, I'm just curious about, in terms of the betting, in terms of people investing their money into purchasing tokens. You know, the whole, in order for the tokens to have value, there needs to be some kind of, there needs to be a reason to invest in it. So I'm just curious about, how do you filter, you know, what is going to have value versus what is not?
Yeah, of course. I mean,
is that a community thing, or is that?
In my mind, it's the value, and it's also really crazy. I just kind of want to point something out, that when I said this about me, like when I opened this with this kind of like personal story and moment, almost half of the room disengaged. And half of the room, when I said that, felt embarrassed. And they started to look down. They started to hold themselves. I said that for a reason, right? Half of the room that I'm staring at started to go, oh, and they started to disconnect and started to look away from me. And that's how San Francisco responds to those problems. I didn't say that because that's been the most intense personal struggle in my life. I said that to prove a subjective point about the issues that we need to think about solving as we're sitting here in a room full of people where someone just raised $250 million on nothing. So obviously our white paper is 26 pages long. And I think reading and understanding, and I think the barrier for a lot of people is they don't actually understand the technical complexity of many of these white papers. And so they're like, well, I mean, sounds like a lot of other people are doing it. So like herd mind, I'm just gonna go into the hive, right? Understanding with a certain level of your own personal integrity, not only the value of the technology, but I mean, I've seen great tech businesses. I've been an investor for years. And I've seen great tech businesses that have absolutely failed because their team sucks. So when I'm looking at, when someone sends me a deck, whether it's in blockchain, whether it's in ed tech, whether it's in food or anything, the first thing I'm looking at is, who are these people? Because at the end of the day, you have to realize whether you're investing in an ICO, you may be investing in an asset, what you're actually investing in at the end of the day is the team. You are investing in people. You're not just investing in some number. You're not a number and they're not a number. So if you really, every company that I've been interested in investing in and that I've been interested in working with, whether they're in the blockchain industry or whether they're outside of it, every single person that I have invested in, I know personally, I know every member on the team personally, and I've invested myself in vetting them as people. So if you're not reaching out to the ICOs, you're thinking about investing them and getting a conversation with the team, then I personally wouldn't say that you're serious about investing, but that's just my philosophy.
Yeah, I think there's some great points there about vetting the code and vetting the team. Another thing that's really difficult for buyers to vet is not just does the code, will it execute as intended, but does the crypto economic model behind the token, behind the protocol actually work? And that's really, really hard for anyone to say right now. You know, do the incentives to the people that are going to use the network and adopt the network and add value, they make sense. And that's a really difficult thing to gauge right now. So everyone's still guessing as projects grow and iterate, we'll learn more.
So when I hear this question, it's almost the same question that VCs ask on a daily basis. Is this horse going to win if I bet on it? And if you look at the way that crowd sales are running right now, it's very similar to what we're already all familiar with. And it's not, I'm not a venture capitalist, so I can't answer that question with certainty. But what I will say is from my own startup experience, which this is my 4th startup now, is oftentimes it's not about the product, because along the way, along the struggle, you'll find different routes, you'll find different avenues to go towards. But the one thing that does stay the longest is the team and the quality of the people that you work beside. And you can only do as much as the team's capable of. And so I would say, number one, if I were to invest in any of these ICOs, first I want to look at the quality of the team, and the other factor that is even harder to see if all you're looking at is a piece of paper is what's their drive. Are they people who are willing to work day and night for this? Is this a hobby for them, or is it a part-time job, or is it something that they're doing from 8 a.m. all the way up until 7 a.m., right? So some of us might be familiar with the crazy hours of startups, but basically I think it's very hard to judge a piece of paper and say whether a startup is going to succeed. So those are my thoughts.
My general recommendation is that this is a field where a lot of people are thinking by analogy, by extrapolation from other things. And my point is that doesn't work. You have to think about these things from first principle. Just because something applied to the internet, you know, when the internet was growing, does not mean it will apply to blockchains. So I'll give one example. I'll return to how important the crypto economic model is. It's absolutely true that you do need to have a great team. I completely agree with that. That's number one. But it's only necessary. It is not sufficient. If you're a VC and you invest in a great team, maybe they get the product wrong. Maybe they get, you know, the monetization wrong. They can always pivot. They can always pivot. They can always do something different. You know, here. If you're building instances, you're deploying a contract, you're deploying, you know, this smart contract, these tokens, it is much, much harder to pivot. If they get it wrong at the beginning, it's quite possible that you end up with a worthless token. It doesn't matter. You know, the app could be, it could be a useful app. Not only is it useful, it does good thing, it's good for humanity, good for everyone, it works great. Doesn't mean the token has any value. And I see very, very little discussion of, you know, of saying, hey, this is a good app. Is the token going to have any value? Like, the app solves the problem. Does the token solve the problem? Because what you were saying is like, does it allocate the scarce resource? If the token itself isn't solving the problem, it doesn't matter how good the app is.
So one thing that I recommend for all crowd sales and startups planning and getting into the space is to add an upgrade feature to like spare yourself the pain and make a way for you to pivot into different directions, because that's actually what some of the crowd sales have done, and it lets you move into different directions. I've seen startups say that they're going to do one thing in the beginning, and they pivot from point A to B to C, and then when you get to D, it's an entirely different industry, and they end up succeeding. That's probably not what you want to hear.
So, how many of you are lawyers? So, sorry for being the lawyer in the room, but you are following the law as a purchaser of a useful token in a network, and you are engaging in a contract when you buy that purchase, relying on what the network you were promised was going to be will be. So just be careful. If you sell A and deliver B, you breach your contract with your token purchaser. So there's a bit of a legal thing here. Consult legal advice. My best advice to people: hire good lawyers. There are lots of people shouting legal opinions on blogs in dangerous ways. You want to look at their credentials. You want to hire your own legal advice and really rely on the legal profession to guide you through the area.
I want to dig into that point a little bit more, which is, Ruben, do you want to describe how regulators are determining if the token is a security and why that matters?
Yeah, great question. I think I'm going to answer a slightly different question. I'm going to answer. I'm going to answer what I think the law is, because there's two separate things, right? There's what the law is, and that's going to be determined eventually through court cases and litigation in the future. And there's what regulators might do, and that's something that's completely speculative at this stage. So the work we did last year and research we did with Consensus and some others in the space basically divided tokens into two camps: those that are securities and those that aren't. And without going into too much detail, the line that we think, and this is just what we think, the line that is drawn is: does your token have a valuable use in a network, and is it therefore a product that is being sold, or is it something that is more like a security that is just sold to raise money for people selling?
Does anybody, Eric, do you have anything to add to that? Or?
I'll chime in on that. That's something we're obviously thinking a lot about. And the work we've been done and the Coinbase work on the securities law framework work is spot on how to think about this. So if you haven't read that, you absolutely should. And that's similar to the line that we're drawing, and the way we think about it is if the token has genuine consumptive utility. There are a bunch of legal analysis. I'm not going to drop the H word here, how we test about that too much. But there's a whole line of very well developed thinking on what is security. It's actually I think kind of the least interesting piece of the puzzle here. The SEC has been applying this to attempted novel approaches for decades. There was just a case out of Utah a couple months ago, the monsoon traffic case or something like that. That was not a blockchain-based solution, but it was like bundling ad revenues from online ads in an analogous manner, and the court had no problem saying, yes, it's software, but yes, it's clearly a security. So yeah, the framework of genuine consumptive utility is probably not a security. If you're receiving a share of revenue from the network, if you're having some kind of creditor right to claim, you're probably going to be a security. And then the way we're thinking about it is there's a lot of risk there. So whenever you're in a gray area like this, you have to understand you're operating unknown and what are the consequences of being wrong. And if you're wrong and it was a security, you have two really big problems that you probably engaging on registered securities offering. I don't get the sense the SEC is terribly interested in that idea right now. They're looking for abusive practices, fraudulent disclosures, the people who are taking your proceeds and disappearing to foreign jurisdictions, etc. You have the bigger conceptual problem, though, that if it's deemed a security, then you have trading issues, right? That you have to be trading on you have to have an exemption to be able to trade freely, and that's to shut down trading. So the idea that I like, and again, I don't want to get too much into what exactly we're doing at Coinbase to solve this, but the idea that I personally like, that I think is the real answer, is sell a known security with the investor protections, and that security then can settle into a token, and then that token is ideally not a security itself. And that way you can use regulated mind, at least in the initial issuance, you're going to have disclosures, you're going to have transparency, and you can fit it in a known framework.
Just to kind of go a little bit further into that, can you tell us what a simple agreement for equity is and how it compares to a simple agreement for tokens? Because that's a big topic.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this simple agreement for equity, for those unfamiliar, was something the Y Combinator launched. It's become hugely popular in the venture fundraising market for the early stage. It's it itself has a number of uncertainties of what exactly it is. But what it boils down to is it's a riff off of the old convertible notes, except you take away the note part. So it's an instrument that will convert into the next round of securities, a preferred typically that gets sold at a discount or a cap valuation. You can set those terms, and the key insight being it's a standardized document, so you have two levers to negotiate. And it gets rid of this fiction of convertible notes that no one actually wants to be a lender. No angel investor is saying, like, I really hope I get my money back plus 4% a year. And so safes kind of get rid of that legal fiction. There's interesting questions that I think they're largely academic. What is a safe in terms of security? Is it equity? Is it debt? Is it a swap? I don't know. SAFs are an instrument that has emerged, a simple agreement for future token. There's not a standardized SAF yet. There are a few floating around that have been used for ICOs, and it uses the same concept of a safe, that ideally these become standardized in the industry, and you have, reduces the number of variables that as a purchaser of a token wants you to think about, and it allows you to sign up today through an instrument, a SAF, to acquire tokens when the network's launched at some discounted price in the future.
Great.
Can I just ask something really quick?
Yeah.
So from my thought, from like a regulatory framework perspective, I mean, Australia just declared Bitcoin to be tax-free. So it's interesting to me because I've heard like a lot of, sorry that I'm not the kind of person who's going to say what makes people comfortable or what you want to hear. I'm going to say what I think and what I feel, but that's just me. I personally think in terms of Coinbase's solutions, it's in my mind propagating the system that we're trying to, I mean, one of the USPs of Bitcoin is that when we're using something like Western Union, we're paying an exorbitant fee to transact on a financial system. And I understand that Coinbase is working with your bank account. And so there are a lot of systemic similarities there, but I feel that their fee rate is so marginally aggressive that it's actually a defeatist prank. When I look at the service, and that's not to say they haven't done great work in other areas. Sorry, I mean I'm not sorry, but I'm not sorry. Sorry, I'm not sorry. You know, and when I look at these other areas, and I look at these other, like I work with regulators all over the world, right? I don't just work in the United States. I build world citizenship IDs. We're creating a world's like a global passport. So I personally think that if we're going to have these kind of crackdowns where we're going to create a monopolized, marginalized infrastructure that's going to take profits away from the hands of the individual, there are going to be other jurisdictions who are going to have the foresight to say, actually, no, this isn't systemically relevant for us to do this in this way anymore. And we're actually not only inhibiting innovation, but we're taking, I mean, we're taking away from, there are actually people, regulators who are intelligent and reasonable. And so I feel like we're really like pigeonholing ourselves and just talking about the United States because it's certainly the most important undecided area in terms of cryptocurrency. But I do have to say my conversations around the world versus my conversations in the United States are way more progressive. And if people create crackdowns that aren't actually providing people with the capital benefit that they could have in another jurisdiction, the talent, this country, blockchain is a global movement. And that's just my, so I'm also, I say that both as a statement and also as a question in terms of the research that those who are looking at legal frameworks have done into international structures.
I just want to prompt you further about BitNation as its own jurisdiction. I know there's actually quite, we talked before this about I mean, BitNation is a nation that's actually recognized by some other nations like Estonia, etc. And so I know we're having a conversation about companies and tokens and this sort of thing, but what does it take to start your own country and issue currency?
Yeah, that's a long answer. There's a whole answer to that question, and I'm also going to say something that's really hard because well, I'm not going to start out with that. I'll start out by talking about BitNation, and then I'll kind of dive into our attitude towards certain nation states. So, for example, actually, no, I'm just going to go for it. So, for example, I don't know if you guys know this, but there are 23 countries in the world where it is legal for you to marry someone if you're in an LGBTQ civil union, and there are over 15 countries where it's legal for you to kill someone for being gay. That number is insane. There are 88 countries in the world that do not allow you to enter into a civil union for being LGBTQ. The amount of that data, the value of that data, BitNation actually allows LGBTQ citizens to get married on the blockchain pseudo-anonymously in a way that can potentially enable them to receive peer-to-peer donations from human rights organizations that actually protect them when countries like Uganda try to pass a bill encouraged by the way, by Western colonialists where you could kill people for being gay. We also give refugees, the 65.3 million accounted for stateless people. These are Holocaust survivors. We ignore this. Like, we see a photo of a child from Aleppo and everyone's like, oh wow, let's share it. I feel like I've done something. Thanks, Facebook, because you get that little uptake, right? But are you actually doing anything? Are you actually solving these problems? No. Most people are sitting around passively just like putting sad faces on Facebook, and that for some reason validates people in a way that I think is not only destructive and cruel, but it absolutely terrifies me in terms of the way that we're actually receiving gratification through disconnecting rather than real, visceral, human life experience. I think that's destroying the happiness of our entire population, sincerely. That's why do you think we have depression here, y'all? What's up? Like, get out there and see the world. Like, if you went and stayed in a refugee camp with me, you would not be so sad about anything that happened to your life here, seriously. So what BitNation is doing in that regard is we just won actually the UNESCO Grand Prix, the Nextflow Grand Prix. The previous 5 winners of that award are Slack, Airbnb, Twitter, Spotify, and M-Pesa. And BitNation won it last year. And that was for our World Citizenship ID that we are doing for refugees, because I mean, these are Holocaust survivors that nation states are telling people because of our fear in the labor markets, because we know that in the short term we're going to have higher rates of unemployment, and we can't really bear to do that, even if the long term we're going to see larger economic gains from allowing immigrants into our society. And in other ways, that's not a risk they're willing to take because of the fear spread by terrorist organizations, which government organizations like the United States actually end up creating and funding to fight other terrorist organizations that were also inspired by Henry Kissinger wanting to fragment the system of power in the Middle East by lying to Assad and then creating there's a whole documentary on this that you guys can watch. So what BitNation does, we're a virtual nation. We essentially provide people around the world with the ability to create their own government. Like Bitcoin's be your own bank, be your own state. Govern yourself, because you should not be sacrificing your agency and your rights to, even for refugees, your right to exist, to someone who tells you need to go through them to have that kind of validity, that credibility. You need to live. You're a Holocaust survivor, so live in a camp that might be a special economic zone owned by a bunch of colonialists. Yeah, sorry, passionate.
I know you're passionate. I'm very sympathetic.
Yeah. So So moving forward, we're essentially providing people with the freedom to own their own life again, and that is BitNation. We're actually launching our token. We're closing our pre-sale at the end of June. And we are closing our full round at the end of July. And the function of our token is not some arbitrary altcoin. We're actually providing jurisdiction as a service, which means accounting for what I call the invisible earth in terms of quantifying smart contracts. And in addition to that, doing dispute resolution, arbitration, and essentially building a blockchain that is like an Ethereum for people to create their own nation states and create applications like universal healthcare, universal basic minimum income with our global registry of citizens. So that's kind of what we're building in a nutshell. I get heated, sorry. I mean, like, not angry heated, but I just care. I care, right? Yeah.
So I want to move this along to Arthur as well, just sort of talk about Swiss jurisdiction, and just that Tezos Foundation is based in Switzerland, and just what your general thoughts are about Swiss foundations.
So yeah, we're partnering with the Tezos Stiftung in Zug to basically chaperone a little bit the Tezos network in its early day, and I think it's great to have a jurisdiction like Switzerland. This Swiss has a great history of I would say care and prudence. I think it will give people confidence that there's a culture I think in Switzerland of how should I say? I don't have to the right English. It's already, but I think there's a culture of diligence and responsibility, legal culture in general that I think is very favorable for that you don't find in many other countries. Maybe you find it in Singapore as well, and a few other countries, but it's not. I think it's a much better jurisdiction than, say, going to the Seychelles or going to the places.
Matt, you have something to add?
I do. So this is one of the few topics in token sales that I've outspoken on. That's that I think the Swiss jurisdiction thing is a bunch of googly. Ruben is a great guy to follow on Twitter because I'm a Twitter neophyte. He retweeted a quote from lawyer Lee Schneider at Depovoice. Lee said something to paraphrase, it doesn't matter where you're selling tokens from. If you're selling them from the moon into the United States, you're still subject to US securities law, which was a great quote. So now if you participate in token sales that come out of Switzerland, you see a lot of this. It's a non-refundable donation to a Swiss foundation for charity to save starving children. And by the way, did anybody participate in the status crowd sale recently? Shame on you, it's not open to US citizens. But I check these things. I check these things because I want to see what people put in their terms of service. And this was a new feature that I loved. In addition to the non-refundable donation to a Swiss Oogly Moogly foundation and that will protect you from US securities law, there was another checkbox that said, I promise and swear on my mother that I understand what I'm buying isn't security. Of course, this is not relevant, right? Like, these things are all nice, but to the Lee example, it doesn't matter if you're in the moon. If what you're selling in the United States is a security, you're going to be subject to US securities law. And Eric's been around law and securities for a long time, and I think, frankly, we both might agree that the securities analysis in the H word is a little boring because it's kind of same as it ever was, right? You look at the token and you apply the same analysis that people have been applying. The SEC has been applying for 60 years since the H word, right? The Howey test. The Howey test. Yeah. The Howey test, which there's a broad definition in the securities laws for an investment contract. Howey is the case that defines what an investment contract is and creates the test by which the SEC and courts sort of apply the metric of what a security is in the context of this broad investment contract. So be careful of the Swiss Foundation thing. Consensus parent company is located in Zug. We run a corporate business out of Zug. It doesn't protect you from doing unregistered securities offerings in the United States. It is a lot of smoke and mirrors, and you are still subject to US law if you're in the United States.
I'll just add on to that I think bridges the two comments that what we've seen so far is the US regulators are being very thoughtful of this. They understand that distributed ledger technologies can solve a lot of real problems and bring forth some of the promise of like early crowdfunding, early crowd sales, etc., of like product crowdfunding things, and help solve some real problems. And to the point raised earlier, that both the SEC and the CFTC are keenly aware that over-regulation can kill the market, and before the potential even emerges, and they're being very thoughtful. Like there has not been a lot of action, and it's not because they're not interested, it's because they're trying to figure out the right approach.
I just want to mention that the Blockchain Token Securities Law Framework PDF is a really great thing to look at, page 10 especially. It's linked to from the SF Legal Hackers Meetup, and you also can find it broadly on the web in a lot of places. But if you're thinking about it, please do that. Christopher, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I really like it. So obviously I'm skeptical and I'm really concerned about the long-term effects of ICOs and whatever. But I guess the question is, what are the alternatives? I mean, why aren't we doing continuous coins or continuous coin would be something like the demand for services of the last week was that we could serve 10,000 people, so we're going to issue 10,000 tokens, and that's it. Next week, next 2 weeks, we're going to do another 10,000 tokens, or maybe 12,000 because our network is growing. Rather than these things all front, because we've got this, there's a moral hazard problem. Not how good you are, the moment you have 60, 7 million, 150 million, 250 million in your pocket, vacations become
So just to restate the question for people who might be watching this online, there's a question of why aren't tokens done as continuous as a continuous process, where they're just these one and done token raises where it kind of removes the accountability and also sort of that kind of thing. I'll just mention one thing that it's partially what CoMakery, my company, is looking to address. Looking to be able to issue tokens for contributors in small amounts and also do releases over a longer period of time. Is anybody else on the panel want to speak to that? No. Ruben?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and it's a great point. And Vitalik recently posted about this issue, right? So this whole ICO craze with capped amounts and enormous traffic and influx and congestion on the network is a problem. Maybe it's a problem solved by ongoing sales. We saw Status try to do something like that with a series of caps. It ended up clogging the network anyway. But I think the broader point is that as time goes by, we're going to see token sale best practices emerge. We're going to learn from the lessons of previous ICOs and we iterate.
Okay, I just want to, we're right at 8:40 here, so I want to have some kind of wrap up question. I'll take one question from the audience. Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thanks very much for you guys for putting on a really awesome panel. I have a question about like this sort of split between tokens as securities versus tokens as kind of like, I guess, prepaid API access things that they have utility within the network. So in the example that you gave, sir, about like raising tokens as a security to finance a film, what is it that you're actually getting? Because I understand that if I buy tokens for a service, that basically, I'm getting maybe access to N minutes of a service or a certain number of requests, and then I can trade them out. What is it that I'm actually getting? What's the legal standing of that if I'm financing a meeting?
Sure. So I'll talk to you about how we did it. So I think this speaks to the beauty of Ethereum and the beauty of public blockchains, right? So one of the problems in film is there's Hollywood accounting, and you can just Google what Hollywood accounting is. It's how movies make billions of dollars and somehow the investors get nothing. Right, so there's no transparency. They use these creative definitions. So what we did, we participated in the Braid sale, which you couldn't if you were in the United States and you weren't in the pre-sale to accredited investors. It was a Reg S sale overseas. If you went through the campaign contribution, one of the stages was actually you signed an investment contract. And that investment contract described exactly what your legal rights were. And in that setup, for $1.7 million of funding, pro rata amongst the token holders, they are entitled to 30% of the future proceeds of the film. In addition to that, they're first in priority repaid from any profits, plus 15%. They get 115% of their money back before anybody else that's involved in the film takes any money out. And then they get 30% of the total share of gross proceeds from there. Blockchain allows for transparency in accounting if you have the right accounting system, which we're going to deploy in the film with our Balance 3 product from Consensus. And then what it does, right, so you're going to hold this token. It's called the Braid token. It sits in your wallet. During the proceed distribution phase, you will receive Ether, most likely Ether. We haven't figured it out yet, but we'll see what the coin of the realm is at that point when there are proceeds, probably about a year from now. You'll receive Ether automatically, pro rata to the number of tokens you hold. So that's what you get in that situation. You actually have a contractual right to proceeds, to money. Right, it's kind of the opposite of what you're seeing in some of these token sales, where you have, you read the terms of service and they guarantee you nothing. They literally say you are entitled to nothing. This is the opposite model, but it's very clearly a security, and we treated it like a security. Right to proceeds from something is a hallmark of something that's a security. Sort of the things that Eric talked about. So you're guaranteed revenue or something.
One more burning question here.
What currency are those? Is it denominated? Profit proceeds, is that dollar denominated or?
So it will likely, this is the comment I made, it's hard to predict the future, right? Like what the coin will be when we distribute proceeds, so we were pretty flexible in that. It would be film. Obviously, if the film is a distribution deal with Netflix, Netflix is probably not going to pay them in Ether, though we hope. At that point, the film will convert the Ether in a transparent way, or convert the dollars in a transparent way to Ether and distribute the Ether to the token holders.
Do you have to be an accredited investor to invest in something like that, or no?
Yes, in the United States, it was a private securities offering. You had to be an accredited investor.
Okay, so we're just going to wrap up here with just a quick, like, 1 or 2 words, maybe a sentence of like things that you expect to see in the future, how investing might be turned on its head by this or not, or just new things to expect in the next year, 2 years.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit concerned because I work at Consensus and we believe in decentralization, and that's sort of like the core mission of the company. If you look at some recent token sales and you look at how they sold out with 60 or 70 different addresses. To me, that kind of makes the securities issue a little moot, right? Like if 70 pre-sale buyers who are probably accredited investors anyway are buying up all the tokens, and what are we really talking about on the securities front, right? Maybe the secondary market is important. I want to see, like sort of Ruben said, there are a lot of smart people, Vlad Zamfir, Vitalik Buterin, Simon De La Riviere of Consensus talks about the continuous token model all the time. I want to see innovation, right? This is all about getting rights to platforms in distributed ways into lots of people's hands. That's how you actually get network effects. You don't get network effects from venture capital firms buying 70% of the token, right? So I'm concerned about that, and I want to see the smart minds deliver on a future model that works.
Great. Kirk?
Yeah, I think we'll end up with, like, there's a lot of buzz and hype around token launches, ICOs right now, and I think that will subside through a dramatic incident or not. That's a major ICO that the person gets hacked afterwards and the person disappeared, the founders or whatever. One way or another, though, the crypto universe is built on an idea of transparency and kind of collaboration, and I think that will hold and grow. And what we're seeing contribute to is layers of ways to coordinate that transparency and accountability. So we see some early, like whether it's code audits, whether it's financial audits that afterwards that you do your ICO, and then there's going to be a portal through which a responsible third party can say, yes, the proceeds that were raised are going to this purpose, and here's the milestones they're hitting. And you can either sign up to that accountability and launch a token on that, or not, right? And those kind of transparency and accountability, taking out a lot of the Wild West that exists right now.
Tony, what do you expect to see in the next year or 2?
Well, I'd like to see a continuation in a certain regard of the Wild West attitude. I think that's one of the great things that makes people come to Silicon Valley in the first place. You wouldn't come to Silicon Valley if you didn't feel like it was a place where you could build anything, do anything, and have one substantial exit that could actually change your life. And I think that's the beauty of this. And I actually think the beauty of this industry is we shouldn't be governed by fear. The beauty of this industry is a restructuring of the model of shareholder capitalism that has encouraged a system where most people make their money through earning working wages, and over 90% of the wealth is consolidated in margins and dividends. And it's a redistribution of these models. I mean, GE has made all of their money since the 80s, not producing product, but trading on financial markets. And I actually think that's the shift we're seeing in the system. So what I'm really hoping for is that we are still creating a landscape that is built on not principles of conformity, built on principles of open innovation, because we don't have an economy that thrives when we're creating regulations to essentially bar people from competing, to create anti-competitive regulations through systemic strongholds over lobbyists based on the people who already have vested capital interest. Because that's why we have, I think that's part of the huge issue with the oligopoly that is the United States today. So that's what I hope to see, and I hope that this remains as a playground, not as a gray box.
Yeah, +1 to that. We might not agree on everything, like Coinbase, for example. But I completely agree with you that it's super important to keep open public blockchains just that. And that means participation by anyone, anywhere. And the problem we have now is a gray, uncertain regulatory landscape. But we hope that over time these best practices evolve, the law becomes clearer, And in the space, it means that everyone can participate.
So what I'm looking for, and this is from an entrepreneur's perspective, is I don't know any entrepreneur who wants more restrictions put on them, but with the landscape that we're seeing currently, I think it's pretty clear that things are getting out of hand, and that's when I think it's healthy for regulations to be in place for things to protect consumers from being exploited. And what we'll probably see in the next few months is more people getting together from the private sector, coming up with their own standards and requirements for whether some crowd sale, whether they'll put money into some crowd sale or not. In terms of the technical and innovation side, what I'm very hopeful for is what we're starting to see now is similar to what we see in a lot of other new leading edge technologies, where in the beginning you have a lot of innovators coming in and building out the ecosystem, really excited about the technology and the technical aspects. And what they discover is that there are a lot of holes in things to fill in infrastructure that's missing. And once you start developing a DApp for users, you start seeing all these holes, and there's a lot of room for other entrepreneurs to come in. But what we'll probably see is as the infrastructure crowd sales, infrastructure dApps start becoming more mature, getting through the test phase, it will begin seeing other dApps being able to leverage that infrastructure and add complexity and start building more sophisticated applications that will add a ton of value.
A couple of things. So I think there's something a little weird right now in the so-called ICO markets, and it's probably the cause is that for a long time there have been all these caps, ICO, and a lot of the capping has been enforced by some weird cultural norms. You know, like back in 2014 when altcoins were launching, people had this weird ethical norm around mining, like as if somehow golden rules, like do unto others as if we do unto you. And then second rule is like, oh, you have to use GPUs, otherwise it's not fair. And people have created all these rules, and basically all of these caps have trained people to think that if they get them quickly into an ICO, they'll make 2x or 3x. And they've trained them to think like that instead of actually looking at projects. And when the Tezos Foundation announced they were going to do it in cap ICO, there was a ton of hate thrown at Tezos by a lot of people who are professional flippers, like they're essentially scalpers. They get in quickly into an ICO, they have to make profits. And people saying like, oh, that's responsible, and so forth. It took fortunately, it took Vitalik to say that the caps were stupid a few days ago to actually, and I think that it's hopefully people are going to learn to pay more attention to the actual content of the project now that this whole thing is gone. The other thing I would say is I remember also back in the days people in the Bitcoin space saying like, oh, we want to be regulated. So forth. And they have, it's kind of like a naive idea that regulation grants you some sort of stature, or like, it's what adults do. And I think what they're doing is like a lot of them have no idea like how to run a business, they have no idea how finance works, and so they're cargo culting finance. And as a result, they're like, yes, we want to be regulated, and then they end up with a big license. And they don't understand that the SEC seems prestigious, but like if they actually thought about the type of regulation they interact with on a more regular basis, like the TSA and the DMV. Like, who says, oh, I want to invite the TSA into my business. I really want the TSA to get involved. I want the DMV to get involved. I mean, I think that the SEC does protect some investors. But like, this is a very, very blunt tool. It's, it's not something that you want to like invite into this industry and like, please regulate. I think it's a little naive. You're not going to get prestige this way.
Great, thank you. I'll just sort of add a few thoughts about what I think is going to happen. I think that one of the things that's interesting about the ICO space is that it's a new form of ownership and of equity. And I think what we're experiencing is actually a change in the nature of the firm, the nature of companies, and we're not quite exactly sure what we're evolving into yet. And so I think as it becomes clearer what decentralized culture is like, what decentralized contribution is, what these network currencies and et cetera look like, we'll understand more how it is that we're actually operating in the future outside of sort of evolving the corporate structure as we know it. And I think that that transformation is going to be really interesting. Hopefully it'll evolve quickly. I want to thank everybody for coming this evening, especially I want to thank our sponsors, Digital Garage, Consensus, Coinbase, techno-legal.io, and also to the International Asset Legal Hackers. I invite you all to stick around. There might be a few more slices of pizza. Please say hello to people and introduce yourselves. Thank you all for coming.